So what we're interested here is foreign influence campaigns. So this is foreign states, so for example, Russia, where they are trying to influence an overall election result. So in particular, they have a particular candidate that they have in mind that is more aligned to their vision, which they want to get over the line and win that election. Now, to do that, they often have to influence a certain part of that country's population in order to be able to get that result over the line. So, for example, we were monitoring the Romania election last year, and a clinching part of that audience was actually to get across the line the expat community. So this is the community that is living outside Romania, whether that's in UK, France, Germany, Italy.
It's quite a big community, right? It's 24% of the population, something like in your report you said? Yeah.
That's exactly right. So it's a huge part of that overall population, but that was the audience that needed to be influenced. And so there were a number of techniques that were being used, but particularly this was done through an online campaign using particularly narratives that are being spread over TikTok is what we discovered. So
TikTok.
Yeah, so TikTok is a really interesting medium. So it's a broadcast medium which is using algorithms behind the scene to push content to those end users. It's very much short-formed video, which is highly addictive, but very easy to get those narratives across. And what we actually found here is that a significant proportion of the videos that were part of the campaign, they were AI generated. They were using deliberately content, often mundane content, to attract, I guess, the eyeballs of the audience. So, for example, we were seeing cooking videos. So people literally cooking in these videos. But then the narratives that were being used to persuade the audience was then in the audio soundtracks over the top. So you were drawn in by the video, and then it was the narratives that was actually influencing that audience. And we saw that.
Sorry, Tom, and just on that, because I love cooking, what was it in particular they were saying over the top of these cooking videos, for example? Were they being as, blatant as everybody should vote for this candidate in the election?
Yeah, so it was a real mixture. And what we found is that they'd successfully found which were the narratives that were actually having the most resonance in the population, and therefore could change their opinions. And often that was to do with nostalgia, identity. So looking back to the good old times around what Romania used to be like. Sometimes it was very much along the religious lines. And often, it was blatant towards the end candidates as well, in terms of you must support X candidate. But we found that the huge amount of narratives fell in those tracks. They didn't tend to move away from that. It was going down those tracks, but with volume in terms of the videos and the audios associated with that, to basically overload the audience in terms of persuading them to change their opinion.
Wow. It's really crazy, because I think in the UK we associate TikTok and just in general, not just its audience, but also the content, so much more with almost pure lifestyle stuff. And then, misinformation on, say, health or wellness or fitness. I don't think we associate it so much with, political messaging, and certainly not the type that we're talking about here that's targeting, an audience that might be a little bit older or a little bit more rural. It's a surprising development. What were the sort of narratives they were picking up on?
Yeah, I mean, part of the other reason why, by the way, is why they use it is hard to detect as well. So in terms of from a counter disinformation perspective, it's very challenging to detect because it's not following your traditional social network structure of recommendations. It's a broadcast medium, so it's hard. The volume's huge. So we were seeing 32,000 TikTok videos that was part of this campaign. And to be able to do that scale, there's a huge amount of those were AI generated as well. But this is where we saw these same types of narratives, and we see this outside of the Romanian election as well. We're seeing similar being used, whether it's in the Baltics region, whether it was used in Moldova, whether it's the Hungarian election as well that happened earlier on this year. It's these same types of narratives. whether it's around religion, nostalgia, identity. We're starting to see a movement now as well, talking about military spending, for example.
Oh,
We're
tell me more about that.
I mean, so lot of it is linked back to Ukraine and I guess the reaction across Europe in terms of the increase in military spending to protect Europe and also to support the Ukrainian efforts as well. And what we're seeing is that narratives that are linked back to people, accounts that are linked back to Russia are often they're linking to that. So they're talking about, well, if spending is increasing from a military perspective, well, what is it not being used for? So it's not being used from an education perspective. It's not being used from a healthcare perspective. And therefore driving on those direct needs of the population to get them aligned to those narratives and to that viewpoint. And then fundamentally, whether an election is happening now or whether it's happening in the future, aligned to those candidates and that outcome of the election as well.
That's so interesting. I think one of the things that I'd heard when I was doing research for this episode and then looking at your report as well was that connection that those narratives drew between not just the military spending and, and welfare, but also the sense that, people believe that this could be, it wasn't a vote against Europe or in favor of Russia. It was a vote for peace somehow. Is that something that's happening more as well?
Yeah, we are very much seeing that in that the narratives which are focusing away from the military efforts are effectively pushing towards driving for peace, which is the focus on the healthcare, the education, which in effect is moving for the candidates that have a greater alignment to Russia, and we also see to Belarus as well. And therefore that drives the peaceful narratives, which is driving against the narratives which align to Europe. So yeah, it is all highly politically motivated, but focusing on direct areas which are at the forefront of people's minds, which are the people who are then voting.
A lot of what we're talking about today is around Russian and, as you say, Belarusian disinformation. Is that entirely... Is that the full gamut of it, or are there other actors in that as well? Is there Chinese disinformation coming into that? Because of course the thing about, recently we had in the States, of course we had a whole load of problems with TikTok needing to be sold off to a US subsidiary and so on because of Chinese influence, or that was the allegation. Are you seeing that across the social network in particular? We're talking about TikTok, but there's all sorts of different ones as well, isn't there?
I think it really depends on the subject matter. So, I mean, at Refute, we're focused much more widely around, rather than just elections in Europe, we're focused on wider discontent around the world and hybrid warfare. We're also focused a lot on commercial organizations as well. And so attacks happening, whether it's the oil and gas industry, the pharmaceutical, healthcare, and wider. And what we're seeing is it really depends what the subject matter is to who's behind it. So we see a blend that it is foreign states. So, for example, Russia, China. It can be local governments. It can be terrorist organizations in some parts of the world. So, for example, we see in Southeast Asia, where there's particular mining operations taking place, that actually they're very close to large-scale terrorist organizations, and the terrorist organizations are hugely part of those influence operations that are taking place. So I think it just depends. And where you are around the world in the industry also depends around, well, what are the channels that are being used as well? So we talk about TikTok, but if you're in Western Africa, for example, that's not the medium. The medium is particularly Facebook. And so the same types of disinformation are being used over Facebook, where it could be in the video in Facebook, it could be in Facebook public groups and wider as well. So it just depends around where you are on the subject matter.
One of the things that I think, you wrote in your reports, I wanted to pick up on is that there's this convergence of tactics as well. So I think, if we're thinking 10 years ago, different organizations that were running different kinds of mis and disinformation campaigns, they would have used different sets of tactics potentially, but they seem to indicate that there was a convergence of that. Is that because there is one actor that's just bigger than others, or is it because others are picking up from the same playbook, or do we just not know?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's probably worth saying that, I mean, disinformation has been around, well, thousands of years, but particularly tens of years, I guess, with the recent subject matter.
I think as long as we've had the ability to communicate, we've managed to make
that's right back to Roman
so
times, etc.
Yeah.
And so I think the best way of saying is over the last 10 plus years is that the tactics have evolved, but lots of the same existing tactics are still being used. So we see that these campaigns are a bit like a pyramid. They have humans involved. We see politicians that are involved. We see influencers that are involved. We see fully automated bot accounts that are involved, that are parts of bot farms. We see outsourced disinformation as a service, where it's tens, if not hundreds of people with semi-automated social media accounts that are all working together. Now, some of those techniques, they've been used for tens of years. Others, what we're seeing is that technology changes, particularly generative AI and agentic AI, is enabling these organizations to automate, and particularly the word is scale, these operations. So some of these accounts are fully automated. They're fully reacting to human interactions. They're becoming incredibly more lifelike. There is content that is reacting to what humans are saying. There is content being put out in the right languages that has been trained on the right emotions and language to be used as well with certain responses. Now, that technology is much more available to different communities as well. So whether it's maybe it's a rogue activist organization, maybe it's some person who just wants to make money, who's located out of that country. They have access to these techniques now. So what you're seeing is, I guess, campaigns that you would have typically seen being used by a foreign state that has hundreds, if not thousands, of people as part of this analyst team who are driving these campaigns, could be used by literally a small group of people, 1, 2, 3, 5 people, who are using a number of these techniques as well. So I think you're right, there is a convergence, but I think what we also shouldn't think is that suddenly everything is fully automated, everything's fully lifelike. It's a grouping of techniques that are working together. That's where we see the most success.
Interesting.
Given the prevalence now of AI and the ability that we have to upscale these things so quickly, I'm kind of reticent to ask this question, but here goes. I mean, is this completely out of the box now? Are we in a situation where, unless people literally stop looking at social media, which is never going to happen, there is going to be a level of disinformation across our political language that is almost impossible to combat?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years is just a mass abundance of, I guess, misinformation, disinformation that is available online. Particularly, we've seen that from a scale out of the different platforms that are being used from a social media perspective and wider. We've also clearly seen from an underlying fact-checking perspective on these social media platforms, of course, from a geopolitical change perspective, is that has decreased, which has increased the amount of disinformation that is naturally being spread. And so it is highly prevalent. There are multiple, I guess in response to that, there are clearly multiple different things that are being done from governments and private institutions around the world to combat that, including legal legislation as well. Whether that's around the age of people who should be viewing this content. So, for example, removing under 16-year-olds in terms of having access to certain social media sites, right the way through to tighter legislation actually on the underlying social media platforms themselves. I still think that even with all of these different changes, that will help to subdue and remove some of the content that is prevalent on these platforms, but there is always going to be a problem, including with the wider expanse of platforms that are existing. So there needs to be a range of techniques and solutions that are being used to at least diminish this overall problem.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're saying that, because I'm, particularly with legislation coming in around the money as well, so it stops at least the financial incentives that would keep expanding that. But generative AI coupled with the platforms moving into trending topics and having algorithms that serve things on the basis of what's emerging right now? What are people viewing right now, especially on TikTok? That it seems like I don't know how you stop it. I mean, how do you keep up with it, right? Like, how does Refute end up keeping up with it? Because if I think about detection 10 years ago, or even just monitoring 10 years ago, I can't imagine how you would do that.
Yeah, so it's from the, I guess, the assumption that disinformation is on the platforms and will continue to be, misinformation, disinformation will continue to be on the platforms. One key component that we see, and which is what we do at Refute, is that you need a degree of automation to fully automate and understand what these campaigns are that are actually taking place on these platforms. And so what we see is, I mean, it's a little bit like, I guess, the start of the Ukraine war and how that's evolved. We saw that there was a huge movement to cheap drones and effectively very expensive defense systems to take down those drones. What we've seen there is that there are now much cheaper counter drone systems in place in order to counter that. What we've seen actually is that disinformation has almost become that cheap drone system that now is being used in place, particularly because of the abundance of AI and how cheap it is actually to run these campaigns. So we're seeing particularly Russia use this technique as a true alternative to warfare. Now, what we're seeing is that, well, there needs to be a response to that enables to scale, but is done at a cost-efficient manner as well, so it can fully cover these campaigns. And so this is where we see automated solutions need to be in place, using AI as part of those detection solutions to understand these disinformation campaigns that are spreading. So at Refute, we are fully harnessing AI, including generative AI, to fully automatically detect these campaigns, no matter what language and scripts they're in, whether they're happening on videos, whether they're happening in the audio tracks, the unstructured text, whether it's happening on TikTok, whether that's happening in news, forums, blogs, and wider. So we're automatically detecting these campaigns. We're identifying these key traits that are part of the coordinated inauthentic behaviors, and then we're bubbling that up to the surface to the end government organizations to be able to respond in real time. And we see that as an absolutely key mechanism, is that level of automation and harnessing AI as a solution to combat this very cost-efficient way of spreading these campaigns.
It's amazing to me because it feels like you've got Botnet 2000 versus AI Detector 3000, and these two kind of competing things of AI having a go at each other and, you know, trying to work out what the quickest bit is. I wondered if, you know, you mentioned things like the under 16s ban on social media, the things that governments are trying to do and legislating on social media. Do governments need to do more, and do they need to do different things in order to combat this problem? You know, is that a case, I mean, I'm a former BBC journalist, is that a case of empowering organisations like the BBC that have a much more soft power thing and you can kind of trust the journalism? I'll get pelters for that, but still. You know, is it
the fact
about,
that everyone's unhappy, James says it's doing something is, you know.
Is it about like trying to work different solutions to combating disinformation? And do governments need to do more?
Yeah, I mean, I see this as this isn't a single point solution that will fight and remove this threat in its entirety. This is an array of different solutions working at all parts, I guess, of the disinformation lifecycle. So this is right from, I mean, we talk about complete bans on certain communities. This is through to media literacy. I see that playing an absolutely key part. This is around, I mean, there's lots of solutions and initiatives in place around watermarking in terms of trustworthy content and understanding where that has originated from and how that's expanded. Watermarking of AI-generated content as well, understanding which content you can trust versus which you can't, no matter what platform you're actually viewing that on. Right the way through to on the understanding you've detected these campaigns, well, how on earth do you respond as well? So there's right the way through to legal means in terms of responding, counter narratives you're putting out there, right the way to a wide array of other techniques as well, which a government has hold of. And so it's that full plethora of techniques. And I think the other thing is that these solutions aren't all like in the government. There are lots of commercial organizations, product companies, services companies that are working on techniques. Refute is one of them. There are an array of other startups, scale-ups across Europe, whether it's UK, Europe, and wider, that are proactively working on different parts of these areas. And I think that's what's exciting, is that this is a key thing that the UK is very good at. I mean, you talk about the BBC and journalists. We've got this really interesting selection of skill sets in the UK with world-leading national security institutions, right the way through to world-leading universities and research, through to journalism and wider, and all of these, and advertising, well. Yeah, and communications, like through to comms firms. And we actually see that they play an absolutely key part in this as well. All of this works together in terms of a coherent set of an ecosystem of solutions, both inside the government and also outside as well.
I think on that point, there's one thing I wanted to touch on to do with Romania, less with Moldova, where they knew right away that this was serious and it was a problem, and they were very vocal about it. But in Romania, there were two things that seemed to take the government by surprise. One was there seemed to be, I think, the speed at which Georgescu rose through the polls in the first runoff took them by surprise. And even as that was happening, no one acted. And then what to do about it seemed to, you can have the information but not deal with it. Are you seeing a change in the way that people think about this now as a result of that, or is it still a common problem where you can have the information, you can have it shown to you, but still not know what to do with it?
Yeah, I think there's been multiple occurrences, including in the UK as well. Yeah. So, I mean, I think another prime example is the Southport murders. In terms of what happened there, is when do you come out transparently with the facts and effectively debunking head on? When is it a strategic counter-narrative coming out? When do you use legal means? When are you trying to automatically take down the content? There are a number of different options in terms of how to respond, or it might, on some occasions, it's the right thing to do nothing, but depending on the subject matter. But I think what we've learned with all of these is that speed is absolutely of the essence. It's to be able to understand what is happening right away. So is there a coordinated campaign, and understanding that in real time, so not spending hours and days, but real time, so that you have time to make the right decision, and doing that in a rapid manner before these disinformation campaigns get out of control. Because I think the key thing here is, once these disinformation campaigns propagate, it is very, very difficult to come back. You have to catch them very early in the cycle before it's spread into mainstream media and got out of control.
Are you hopeful?
Are we hopeful? Yeah, I am very, very optimistic with these things, but I think that the problem we've got here is, look, we're seeing the solutions to counter these disinformation campaigns. We are seeing them rapidly evolve, both from what we're doing, I guess other people and organizations in our ecosystem. We are seeing the government, whether that's UK and wider, in terms of putting legislation through as well. So there is an involvement. I think there's a question around it. Is it happening quick enough? But the problem we've got is that the adversaries are working. Also, they are rapidly evolving. The technology is rapidly evolving. And so I think we have to see, with all of this is an arms race. It's a complete arms race in terms of what's happening. And we need to be moving faster than the adversaries are moving. And at the moment, that is really difficult. I think there is more we can do. There is more that can be done with the public sector. There is more that can be done from legislation changes to be able to keep up with this subject matter. So what we're seeing literally month by month at the moment is more campaigns taking place. We're seeing a majority of elections across Europe. We are seeing there are active campaigns taking place. We are seeing one of the things that's not talked about is commercial organizations are being hit. Massive financial consequences in commercial organizations like cybersecurity was 10, 15 years ago. And that's, to be honest, hardly even making the headlines at the moment. And I think that is the next thing that will hit the headlines is what's happening in the commercial space and what does that mean to economic growth pillars, whether that's in the UK or wider.
Well, can you give us an idea of what you mean by that? Are you talking about things like banks being hit, for example? What exactly do you mean when you say commercial organizations are at risk?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on, I guess, some very sort of well-known spoken about examples from financial services, Credit Suisse, Silicon Valley Bank, in terms of bank runs that would typically take days, weeks to happen. Literally took place in hours and low number of days, happening over social media and wider. I mean, that's a more traditional one talked about from a financial services perspective. I think what we're seeing actually is that there's 20 plus industries that are being heavily affected right now. Some really prominent examples are in the extractives industry. So mining is a prime example where mining operations take place in very risky geographies. That's where the minerals are, the commodities are. There is huge foreign state competition, again, with Russia, China, and Western governments. And influence operations are a natural battleground which are trying to have influence over these mines. So, for example, Rio Tinto in Serbia with their Jadar mine, one of the largest lithium mines globally, 2 billion euros plus capital investment, and a disinformation campaign starting on social media and fake news websites, rapidly progressed, Russian linked, again, ending up with tens of thousands of people on the street protesting, narratives, of course, around from an environmental concerns perspective, but also going into much more political anti-EU narratives. But fundamentally ending up with the whole of that 2 billion mine being completely mothballed. Nothing's happening with it. It's mothballed. And so that's huge repercussions, of course, commercially to that organization. But also, if you follow the supply chain, I mean, that's going up into electric batteries that were in 10% plus of electric vehicles in Europe. So huge consequences from an economic perspective, but also from an environmental perspective globally. And that's happening in all of these industries. It is literally like cyber was 15 years ago, and boards are now seeing this as a fundamental, existential risk to their business.
I think it's fascinating because we are so used to talking about things like disinformation in a kind of nebulous way of, oh, look, all this stuff's happening on social media. But actually then the real world effects of it, as you explained there, are myriad and I would have thought just incredibly difficult to fight against, because it as you say, encompasses various different sectors, including mining, including lots of others. It's such a difficult battle because I'm assuming new fronts are opening up all the time as well.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is these areas that we just talked about, they're all blurred. So geopolitics is one of the main drivers for these attacks on commercial organizations. And for example, that Rio Tinto example, we saw the same social media bots that were being used against Rio Tinto were also being used on the Romanian election as well. So there is huge blurring across here. And what's interesting is if you look at commercial organizations, this is seen as a brand reputational threat to these organizations. And so typically it sits from a board down to the comms team. These comms teams, they're not often large in these organizations. This is 1 to maybe low tens of people in these comms teams. And they're used to more traditional communications out, whether it's around responding on brand reputation, putting out articles in mainstream media. What they're not used to is this warfare that's happening, which has foreign states, rogue competitors potentially as part of that. It's a completely different way of operating, and these organizations, what we're seeing is they're just not ready. With cyber, these organizations have had 10 plus years to battle harden. There's been policies and stuff wrapped behind it. There's been an ecosystem of products and tooling to these organizations. This is greenfield. This hasn't happened yet to these commercial organizations, so that they're hugely vulnerable.
I was going to say, if you have, if you're thinking about a commercial organization that has a big consumer base, like, so say Unilever, for example, or McDonald's, or, Kraft Heinz, anything like that, because they have that exposure to consumers, they have that kind of research. They, in some ways, are much better built for this. I imagine that for industrials, and especially for extractives, your main way that you think about how you prepare the ground for a mine or for any project or responding to things is very much about lobbying, stakeholders, talking to the city. You're not really equipped for a massive, effectively consumer media campaign. And I can just see that this is completely upending the way these organizations have to think about communications. In a way Procter & Gamble probably doesn't. They're subject to this stuff too, but they're just more used to people saying crazy things sometimes.
Yeah. But I guess this isn't your traditional media campaign. This is a fully coordinated influence operation that's taking place.
I mean,
which is a lot harder to deal with.
But the outcomes are very similar to the way, consumer misinformation does that, right? So like when I worked on Procter & Gamble, I was working on it when the Tide Pod scandal happened, right? And part of it was, there were safety issues, but the other part of that was that people were eating them, like, for a variety of reasons, all of them ridiculous, but they were doing that. But Procter & Gamble had, some exposure already to what happens when people do that. So it was still an emergency, but it was something that they kind of knew how to react to, and they weren't, although you're always surprised by the things people do, you have it in your wheelhouse to develop it, I guess. But I guess if you are Rio Tinto, right, you're not exactly doing, round the clock consumer research to understand how people think and the myths they have about you, and, so I can imagine you'd be blindsided.
Correct. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And the parts of the organization that they're just not used to this type of threat. One, to how to find it, and two, how to respond. But really importantly, in a timely manner. So you can't wait days to make a decision. This has to be in real time. And the problem we've seen is it just takes out whole parts of your organization. Either it's completely stopping operations, and so it's financially crippling. We also see it, it starts to blur then into a physical health and safety risk, whether that's of the executives or the staff, maybe in particular geographical high-risk locations, which eventually becomes a life and death situation. So we start to see all of these different worlds, so from physical security starting to blur with that disinformation space as well.
On your website, on Refute's website, you have a line about disinformation damaging the underlying fabric of society. Do you think we're at the point now, and we kind of touched on this, but I want to be clear about it, has it already damaged the underlying fabric of society, in your opinion, and could that get worse?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is we often talk about elections, but elections they're almost it's too late. It's the build up to what is happening before. So we're fundamentally seeing tactics, particularly around, we call it hybrid warfare, which is around changing how society thinks, is structured, is putting fracture lines in society. Those are the tactics that are being used. And yes, I do see that headway is being made to do that. And I think that is what we all need to be aware of, and that is what we should be combating. So not just thinking about elections, but thinking about what is leading up to that is causing those to actually have a profound effect when it comes around to the democratic process.